the to-do list workshop, API routes, and database tables. When you look at a design, you are looking at what the user can do on the front end, but that's only one piece of the puzzle. So we also need to plan out what happens on the back end between the API and the database, and the way the front end communicates with the back end is through requests. So I went ahead and I drew out and planned out all of my requests and my database tables, and I did it based on the functionality. So this section is going to be all about creating projects, features, user stories, and tasks. Okay. And then this top section here is going to be all about creating a user account and maintaining the user account. All right, so let's go ahead and start with the first one. So the first two here are going to be the sign up and the login post requests. Okay, so when you were on that user account workflow and you were looking at the create an account page, a user would go ahead and put in all their information in that form and then click submit. When they click submit, a request is going to go to the API, all right, and it's going to be a post request to/signup. Okay, with that request, we are going to send a name, email, username, password, and photo. Okay. Then a sign up function is going to create a new user if the user doesn't already exist in the user table, and send a welcome email to the new user. Then it's going to log the user in, which on the back end just means that it's going to get an access token and return the access token to the front end. The access token will be then saved in local storage on the front end and used as an authorization header for future requests to protected routes. The purpose is to make sure that you can't hit some of these endpoints without being logged in. Okay? So then let's say you already have an account, but you're signed out. You would go to the login page on our front end, and you would fill out your username and password and then click submit. And that submit clicking will send a post request to the login route with the username and password. The login function associated with that route will verify that the user exists and verify that the password is correct, and then log the user in, which once again is just going to be creating and returning an access token to the front end. The table associated with these routes is going to be the user table. The user table has several columns. It has an ID column, which is auto-generated and incrementing, okay, and name, email, username, password, and photo. And all of those fields should be strings. All right. So when we were looking at the wireframe, we saw on the login page that there was a reset password button. So when you click that button, a modal pops up asking the user for their email address. When they enter their email address and then click send verification email, they will be making a request behind the scenes to the reset password route, and they will be including the email in the request body. So the reset password function is going to verify that an email exists, and if it does exist, it's then going to send an email to that user with a password reset link. The response here isn't really going to be used, but just some sort of success message. All right, so now we'll move on to the profile page. So there's a few different routes associated with the profile page. We have get profile, which is going to take the ID. And okay, this part is a little bit complicated, but we'll walk through it step by step in the upcoming weeks. But for now, the whole point with that JWT, when it is sent with a request, is then it's going to go through an auth guard, which is going to decode the token and get a user ID out of it if it's a valid token. Okay, so when we call the get profile route, when we load the profile page, okay, we'll be using a loader function from React Router. right? We're going to send our access token with the request. Our auth guard is going to decode it and give us a user ID. We are then going to look up our user data with that ID from the user table, and then we are going to return the user data. Okay, so that's when you first load that profile page, and that's how you're going to get the name, email address, username, password, and profile picture showing up on that page. Okay, when you go to edit any of those details, you will be using one of these two routes. We either have post, upload photo, so when you hit that little pencil next to the profile photo, right, you'll see a modal that will ask you to upload a file, right? So then you will go ahead and click submit. It will send the file and the user ID to the upload photo route. The upload photo function will then upload the photo to an AWS S3 bucket and then save the photo URL into the users table and return the updated user data to the profile page. Okay. The change account detail, right? So if you see the pencil buttons, the icons next to the other pieces of user data, the name, email address, username, and password, right? If I go ahead and click on that, I'm gonna see an input appear, and then I'm gonna type in my new value for that field, okay? So then when I click enter on my keyboard, it's going to send a request to change account detail, okay? And it's gonna give me a user ID, a field, so that's gonna either be name, email address, username, or password, and then a new value for that field, okay? The change account detail function is gonna then go look up the user, update the field in question, and then return the data for the updated user. The last button on that profile page is for deleting the user. When you click that button, it's going to make a post request to the delete user route, okay, with the user ID in the body. The delete user function is going to delete the user from the users table, and it's also going to delete all of that user's associated projects, features, user stories, and tasks, and then respond with some sort of success message. Okay, so those are going to be most of the routes on the back end with respect to user accounts. We do have one more. Okay, this is going to be the route that when we click that link in the reset password email, the link is actually a GET request to the profile with a /token and a /ID. So those params will be extracted from the URL, and then the GET profile reset function, once it extracts those params, will verify that the token is valid, and then it will return a new login token. So we'll have a new login access token that will get sent to the front end, which will then allow the user to automatically log in and put that token in their request headers. All right, so that is the user account routes. Now, I'm sure they're not perfect. I'm sure when I start coding, I'll be like, oh wait, I actually needed this data, or I needed to change this, but this is a good start, okay? And it gives you a good plan, and I've thought a lot of it through. So hopefully now when I start coding, I can code a little bit faster than if I wouldn't have thought all of this through. All right, so now let's go ahead and move on to our project creation, editing, and deleting portion of things, okay? We'll go a little bit faster in this section because it's all pretty similar. Okay, so we have a post request. We have 4 different post requests that create things, right? So we can create a project, a feature, a user story, and we can also create a task, okay? So projects, features, and user stories all have names and descriptions. So let's go ahead and look at the tables that are associated with them, okay? So as you can see, they look pretty similar, right? We have an ID that's just generated by the database in all 3 of them. Then we have a foreign key lookup, okay? So in the project table, each project is associated with a user, okay? So the way we link project and user is through a foreign key. So we include the user ID, whoever created that project, we include that their ID in the project table. Then we also have a project name and a project description, which is going to be optional. It can be null, or it could be a full string, okay? The feature table works similarly. We have an ID that's just auto-generated. Then, because a feature is part of a project, right, then we're going to associate it with a project ID through a foreign key. Then we have the feature name and feature description. Username, same exact thing. An ID, a feature ID, right, because a user story is part of a feature. Then a user story name and a user story description. Task is pretty similar in terms of as an ID, and then it's associated with the user story. However, we only do task names. At this point in the project, I'm not going to include task descriptions, but something that we do have that the other ones don't have is a task status, and the default is going to just be to do, okay? So now that we kind of understand the way our database tables work, let's look at the routes. Okay, so we create project is going to send a project name and description and a user ID. So it's the user who created the name and description, and then what they put as the name and what they put in the description in that little form on the wireframe design, okay? The function is going to save a new project in the project table, okay? It's also going to sanitize the project name and description, so that way if there's any cross-scripting attacks, we can get rid of them, and because we are going to be displaying projects on the screen. Okay, post request for create feature, same way. User story, same thing. And task, same thing, okay? You'll see that when you create a task, you aren't creating it with a status. That is in the update task. Post request. All right. So we can also update these things, right? So we can update a project where we would send the project ID. So the identifier for the project that we want to update, we would send the user ID. And the reason why we send the user ID is not because we need it to find the project, but because we want to verify that the user who is requesting the project ID is also the user who made it, okay? So if I found out John Doe's project's ID is 1234, and then I went into my browser and typed in project/1234, I want to make sure that someone can't do that and access someone else's project. So that's why I'm going to send whoever's logged in's ID to, and so the update project function will validate, okay, this is the correct user, and then it's going to go look up that project. It's going to get the field it needs to update, and it's going to put it in that new value, okay? And then it will return the project data. So feature will work the same way. Let's make sure this is the right user that's trying to edit this feature, and then let's find the field we need to update. Let's swap in the new value. Same with user story, okay? And then updating the task, okay, is going to be pretty similar, but instead you could update the name or the status instead of the name or the description. All right, so we have most of these gone over. All right, so then we have our deletes, okay? So they all work pretty much the same. We are, again, sending the user ID with the request, so that way we can verify that John Doe is not trying to delete Jane Doe's project, okay? But other than that, we would just look up the project ID, find that project, and then we would go through and we would delete the project, the features associated with the projects, the user stories associated with those features, and the tasks associated with those user stories, okay? Deleting a feature does all the same stuff: feature, user stories, and tasks, and then user story deletes the user story and the corresponding tasks, and tasks just deletes the task. Okay. You'll see that when we delete features, like when we delete a project, right, we're just returning a success message because we deleted the whole thing. Okay. But when we delete a feature, we are going to return the rest of the features because they're deleting one feature. When we delete a user story, it's the same thing. You'll delete one, and if there's 4 left, we'll return the 4 that are left, okay? And same with task. All right. The final 2 routes are going to be our routes for loading the data when we load the initial page. So this first route is getting all of the projects for the users. So that's like our main projects page. When we load that page, we have a loader function associated with it. And so we are going to take that ID, right? That ID is going to be for the user ID. And then we are going to go and get all of the projects associated with that user. We're going to return a list, an array of project names and statuses, because that's all we need to display on that page is the project names and project statuses, but also project descriptions too. So let me go ahead and add descriptions. All right. Then for this route here is getting a specific project, okay? And we are going to look up the project ID and go get it and then send it back. All right, so these are all of our routes and all of our database tables.